for probably most corporate innovators, and I've worked with a fair number of them, there's something kind of in the DNA or in the personality or in the character, something that's really kind of deep inside that says, I need to kind of do this work. And if you don't, I don't think you'll last. I don't think that you'll stick around. So that's how I connect with it, is something, I'm an artist by nature. I'm creative. I love business as well. So it's this, once again, this kind of synthesis of the two. And I just try to figure it out.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering catalysts to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations. And I'm thrilled today to have time with Tommy Knoll. Welcome, Tommy.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. We have some good themes to pull on. Tommy's the founder and head of the Innov8rs CoLab, a global working group of senior innovation leaders. He's been an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, a business owner for more than 25 years, with international experience across multiple industries, including corporate innovation management and consulting, technology, e-commerce, importing and distribution, and advanced manufacturing. And Tommy's based right here in Boulder, which is so lovely. So let's jump in. Obviously, that's like the super highlight version of your background, and people can check you out on LinkedIn as well. But we'd love to hear about your catalytic journey, maybe sharing a few career highlights that you're proud of so we can see your catalytic nature.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I think there's probably two main catalytic moments in my career. One I'll call maybe a major moment and a minor moment. I'll start with the minor moment and kind of just go through history a bit. But I'd have to say, before I became a father, before I even got married, honestly, I decided to be an entrepreneur. At some point, that was where the world was taking me. That's where I wanted to go. And that was a big moment. There was a lot in that moment where I don't know if people go through this, but my experience was, it just became so clear, my pathway and what I needed to do. I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to blend really creativity with business. That was the kind of the synthesis that led me to entrepreneurship back, 25 years ago. So that was a big moment. I went off to work in the outdoor industry for a long time. I worked in e-commerce for a little bit. But that moment really led me down the rabbit hole into entrepreneurship, which incidentally or not led me into intrapreneurship, which was my major catalytic moment in my life, which I think for me started during the great financial crisis, whatever we want to call that moment in 2007 and 2008. I'll just call it the great financial crisis, where it seemed as if the world was at that moment in the throes of some pretty major change. We may or may not be in that moment again right now, but certainly in that moment, I felt like it was time to evolve, myself to keep up. And that's where I stumbled upon, innovation, as perhaps an operating model or a philosophy. I didn't know at the time exactly what it was, but I felt like either my career, my work, my business at the time needed to be more dynamic. It was not, I was not evolving, my business was not evolving, and the world was really changing rapidly. And so I was looking for solutions to step into that would help with this, to be more dynamic. And that compelled me into corporate innovation. I didn't even know corporate innovation at the time. I just wanted to be around those folks who were really looking like the artists and the creatives of big companies, right? They're leading these big companies. They're doing these amazing things. They have resources. I had been an entrepreneur and had been in the world of scarce resources, and I thought, wow, innovation in big companies, what a great tapestry, what a great canvas to be able to paint on. So that led me to corporate innovation, and that was about 2009, and I've been in that space ever since.
How'd you make the jump? What did that look like?
Yeah, it was a multi-year process for me. As I mentioned, I was in the I had an import and distribution business. I worked with some amazing companies in the outdoor recreation business for a long time, and I knew that for me it wasn't the long-term plan, right? I knew that that catalytic moment compelled me to think beyond that industry and that role that I was in, and so it began multi-year journey to get into corporate innovation. I had to sell my company first and foremost. That was a big change, and then step into something new. And during that whole process of selling my company, looking at what I wanted to do, the world just opened up, and I actually here in Boulder connected with one of my original business partners at the time, and we were kind of kindred spirits around corporate innovation, and we ended up partnering and working together for several years. But really finding that one person who was a kindred spirit really opened me up to all sorts of new thinking and a network and a business model, and yeah, it was a multi-year process though.
Yeah, I think more talking about the power of those strong foundational partnerships. Like, I'm just so grateful for having Tracy too, right? I mean, it's hard to be an entrepreneur, and having someone in the trenches with you is super lovely. So given all of that, how do you relate to the concept of being a catalyst?
If I'm being honest, I struggle with it a little bit. There's good days and there are bad days. There's kind of two sides of the same coin, and I tend to use something called balance sheet thinking, or where there's pros and cons, right? And I can easily go off into either one of those, domains and get really ecstatic and excited, and or I can go in the other direction and kind of get depressed or in despair around how challenging it is. And so I've learned to kind of take this middle of the path approach, where there's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days. I think that's just the human condition, but certainly within corporate innovation, that's the case. There may or may not be more bad days in corporate innovation. Certainly plenty of challenges, but I think it's for probably most corporate innovators, and I've worked with a fair number of them, there's something kind of in the DNA or in the personality or in the character, something that's really kind of deep inside that says, I need to kind of do this work. And if you don't, I don't think you'll last. I don't think that you'll stick around. So that's how I connect with it, is something, I'm an artist by nature. I'm creative. I love business as well. So it's this, once again, this kind of synthesis of the two. And I just try to figure it out.
How do you, sort of two-part question, because they're related, but they're different. How do you stay motivated through the bad days? And I appreciate the candor of there's probably more bad days than good. And how do you keep from burning out?
I don't know if I do. I burn out. But and that's once again a continual learning process for me. But I think self-care has got to be top of the list. This is difficult work. It's challenging work. I think that it is different than, I'm an entrepreneur and I kind of have a small business, but I work with these folks and I support these folks, and who are in these big companies trying to advance, their innovation and growth agenda, whether it's transformation or technological or whatever. And that's different than, let's say, somebody who's in a finance role or even a sales and marketing role, where not that those roles are inherently more stable or more predictable, but I think they are. And so I think self-care is really important. So physical, mental, psychological, practices to kind of keep you well balanced are really critical. I encourage all of our members, all of my clients, to make sure that they're doing that and they can show up. If they're not fit physically and mentally, then you will burn out. And I've gone through plenty of burnout in my life to learn that that those practices are the only thing that will kind of serve you in the long term and keep you well.
Yeah. What we know is true for catalysts, research says, and this isn't an introvert extrovert thing. What we know is true is that being in community with other catalysts has this super restorative, recharging effect. And that's a big part of what you do. And so it's such a great pivot. I would love to understand, through the years of experience of both supporting and convening innovation leaders, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen from that community, and maybe how have they overcome them? And I'll give you the second part to the question because maybe you want to just flow into it. And what are some of the new trends that maybe don't have answered questions that innovation catalyst leaders are facing right now?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges with just convening folks is just a wide range of, for lack of a better term, characters or personalities that are part of it, right? We'll have everything from, running the spectrum from introvert to extrovert and everything in between, right? And I think inherently people have some blend of both of those, but might tend to lean one way or the other. And so we were talking before we got on the call about engagement and how important that is for, for our line of work. And so attracting or compelling or engaging folks who are more extroverted is really totally different than the introvert, right? These are just kind of two general archetypes of, just people in general, but certainly in our line of work, you could have the introvert innovator who's maybe more like an engineer or, a writer, or kind of works kind of by themselves. And there's not a right or wrong approach here. This is just how these folks, show up. We might see that more in a technology-based organization. And then with the extrovert, right, that they really want to be out there. They're more sales and marketing or PR oriented and really want to engage, right? And so we have to really figure out how, what messages, what communications, what tactics work to compel both of those, let's say, archetypes, to show up and engage, because they both are valuable and they're both part of our community, but they have different needs, right? And so we have to figure out how to, how to do that. We're inherently a community. We want people to come together. We want people to share, whether you're an extrovert or introvert. So creating the forums and the formats and the places where it's digital, whether it's digital or otherwise, we have to continually figure out how to appeal to both those different archetypes.
I'd love to understand, like, as you've been convening those, the whole spectrum, what are some of the challenges that community has been experiencing? Like, what are some of the top things that they're bringing to the group, maybe hoping to solve, and what were some of the solutions, if any?
Yeah, it's interesting because, this person that we support, call it the corporate innovator or the entrepreneur, right? These are folks who are, either leading or facilitating change or growth or transformation inside some type of a large organization, typically. At least that's the folks that, that we work with. And I think that for a really long time, innovation was the thing, right? Let's be more innovative. It's in the corporate reports. But that didn't necessarily trickle down or get communicated to, to the organization in general. And so therefore, these folks who are leading these efforts, let's say it's a VP or a director or even a manager, they were kind of left out to kind of figure it out on their own. And there's a lot of failure in that, right? Without clear direction from, let's say, the C-suite or the board, or just senior leadership in general, they're left to experiment and figure out what to do. And if that's the case, most of the time their efforts fail, I'll be honest. So having that connection between, like, the C-suite and senior executives around the value of innovation or corporate innovation or change or transformation or adaptability, however they describe it, really has to be articulated in what we call socialized within the organization. And that C-suite or senior leaders really have to own it. And if they don't, then they're going to fall short. And the example I use is like Jeff Bezos. Like, that guy's got innovation on his calendar. Like, you look at his calendar and he's going to have innovative or new projects probably ruling the day, and might be different now since he's retired. Same with Musk. You look at his calendar, he's inventing the new stuff. He's not dealing with, financial reports and reporting to Wall Street, right? So we support all of our members in making sure that leadership buy-in is there, because once that's there, you can do a lot. If you don't have it, you're really not going to go anywhere.
All right, so I have to ask the question then, what's the solution to the problem? How do the innovation leaders get the C-suite support, especially if they have potentially like the antithesis of a Bezos or a Musk, which might not be bad in all cases, but particularly on that topic, if it's not like
Yeah, I think
the NDA of the leadership, the TNA.
yeah, I think it's really critical to know their perspective. You know, it's really whether it's a philosophy or a policy, right? And it can range. It can be like, hey, you know, innovation is interesting, we should have it. You know, I'd call that a curiosity. And then the other end, it might be, you know, full on policy. We will innovate. We're going to invest money in this. We're going to invest resources in people. We're going to, you know, adopt this as part of our agenda. Sometimes that can be found in the corporate reports. Sometimes you can sense it in the like communications or messaging from the C-suite, right? But in one way, shape, or form, like it has to be assessed, right? You have to really assess what is the C-suite's buy-in on innovation. Is it light, you know, implicit, or is it like deep, explicit, right? And you have to start there, right? So you can build a strategy, you can build an approach from both of those places. But sometimes we'll work with folks, let's say, and you know they really want to innovate and change and do new things, but leadership doesn't really care, and they'll go off and they'll do their thing, and then they'll be upset when they don't produce anything. So that misalignment happens quite a bit. So really aligning, I guess, is the key thing.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about like the challenge of this role is like you're not the CFO or the salesperson. And while there may be ambiguity because the world is shifting and how we engage with our customers or like what our financial targets may be changing, there's still clarity about what you're delivering for the business. Whereas with the innovators and the change leaders, like if everyone understood it and can do it, it wouldn't be a thing, right? And so I think what you're hitting on is really important, which is getting the clarity and alignment of like, what are we talk a lot with our customers about expectation alignment. Like, how many resources do I have over what time and with what level of commitment from the rest of the org? Because when you turn those dials, the output is really different. And I think helping people get to that clarity. And then what, you know, when we work with Catalyst, and I'm curious about your thoughts about this, is like, once you get that clarity, if that's not where you're at, if you're like, I don't want to do more incremental process optimization, then you have a decision as a Catalyst yourself to be like, maybe not the right place right now.
Precisely. And that's where we might describe that person as the entrepreneur, right? Like they might be in a CFO role. They might be in a role that is stable, but they're looking to advance the practice, right? Or the function, adopt a new technology, adopt a new practice, do something a little bit differently. Like, you know, everybody can be an entrepreneur within an organization, and they probably should be. To some extent, it doesn't mean they have to be, you know, inventing the new iPod, you know, but they can be advancing, you know, and in this world, everybody needs to be thinking about that, if not actually practicing some type of a change, you know, program for themselves. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, figuring out I think the word's tolerance, right? The tolerance for change. You know, and every organization has a change tolerance. And
Yeah.
being really like keyed in to what that tolerance is can really determine, okay, well, this is how far I can go with this. This is how much change is possible. And then yes, if it's misaligned with what, you know, an individual wants to do with their career or work, then a change has to be made or should be made.
It's a great segue because I got really excited as I was prepping for our conversation about the article that you wrote about having failure policies for organizations. And so while we work with organizations often to do these big catalyst programs where we're helping them like identify and activate and train their catalysts, we also work with organizations where we're just working across the organization because change is the new normal. And we have so many people, customers who are like, yeah, we want to fail fast or embrace, you know, failure is a core value or, you know, whatever. And when you bring that to the teams, to the body of employees, they're like, that sounds good, but I have no idea what that means. And if I don't have any idea, goes back to the clarity and expectation setting. If I don't know what that means, I'm not likely to lean into that or take on the risk. So you have this amazing article. I'll put the link in the show notes, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit more because I don't think we're talking about that specific thing enough.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing this back up. I had forgotten about that that article, and I really liked it. I think that inherently with innovation, there's going to be failure, or you call it experimentation. Doesn't necessarily have to be innovation related, but in any organization, there's going to be some failure, regardless of what happens. And I think that there's probably I don't know, this is a bit of a generalization, but there's a lot of fear in most organizations around failure or looking poorly or looking bad, right? I mean, it's just a human nature to be concerned about, your performance. But we're human and we're going to fail. Like it's going to happen, and just in this particular area of entrepreneurship and corporate innovation, the failure rate is high, right? Or should be high if you're doing it correctly. And so I think that for that person who is in the innovation role inside of a big company versus like in a startup, there's a whole different dynamic in a
Totally.
smaller company, or if you're an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, totally different perspective, culture, let's say,
Yeah.
expectations around failure than it is inside of a big company. And I think that, generally, if you look across the Fortune 500, of course, the past 20 years or so, these organizations are brittle, they're really rigid, right? And that can serve them well or not. And so in, the innovation realm, the failure rate is really high. And if that is a fear or a blocker, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to experiment, you're not going to learn, you're not going to advance, right? And so in order to create an environment where, I hate to say failure is accepted, but I don't know what the right word to describe it, but let's just call it accepted for now. But like, if you fail, then this is what's going to happen. You're still going to have a job. If your department goes away, we're going to reassign you. Things like that would be part of a failure policy. That not that failure is okay, but this is what we're going to do with failure if it happens. We're going to learn from it. We're going to evolve with it. We're going to pivot. Like this is what we're going to do if something doesn't work out, and know what happens after the failure, so that those people that are doing the work and are failing know what to expect after the failure, instead of, sorry, but you're fired. So that's where a failure policy, I think, is really important, to set expectations around what happens when things don't work out.
You mentioned in the article SpaceX, which is super interesting because they're like, we are gonna fail. Like we're blazing so far ahead into things that people didn't even think were possible. We're gonna crash some rockets. That's gonna happen. And what we're celebrating, like I remember one that, you're listening live and one crashed but everyone's still clapping on the video. It's like, oh my God, we learned so much stuff. I'm wondering if you have other companies, and I wanted to contrast that with Boeing.
Sure.
Right? Because
Sure.
Boeing has had failures, but not the kind of failures that were expected, not the kind of failures that were okay. And while I don't sit inside Boeing and I only know from the outside what everyone else knows, there's an interesting part of like, if we didn't have some safe place to raise our hand, and I think this goes back to like the Japanese Kaizen almost, which is like, how are we empowering people to call it when they see it? Because that sometimes is the scariest thing. That thing's not working, guys. Not just like I took a risk, but something we're doing isn't working. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about like what your advice is for companies moving forward. Like not everyone's going to be a SpaceX and have a clear, like, we're going to try this thing and fail on a huge scale publicly. But like, how do they metabolize the failure policies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts with, like an assessment around the cultural temperature, right? What's the temperature of the culture? What is, and I'm literally just making that word up as we talk about this, but what's the vibe? What's the cultural temperature of the organization? And I think that, the Boeing and SpaceX example are, two contrasting narratives, right? Like Boeing, and I grew up around McDonnell Douglas. I saw I saw a lot of these folks. They were my friends' fathers who, built these products early on, and theirs approach. And once again, this is not a right or wrong. This is just two different scenarios, and pick whichever works for you. But with Boeing, it was engineer, 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 figure everything out ahead of time. And then the experiment is going to go exactly according to plan. right? They really tried to forecast, all the different variables before they started to experiment. And that was just an approach, right? And I think, SpaceX approach is, we're going to get to a point where we can experiment. We're not going to be reckless and unsafe with sending rockets up, but the whole point is, let's get to experimentation as quickly as possible. Experiment, crash some rockets, get the data. And Musk knew that, right? He would go into these experiments with a learning mindset, like this is about data capture, and they still do that. They're still, with every mission, capturing all this data, and something goes wrong, boom, let's really zero in on that. So I would call that, like, SpaceX example of, calling the cultural temperature is, a learning, experimentation, and failure, and that's how you advance. And Boeing had their own. And once again, these are two different perspectives, kind of two ends of the spectrum. But I think the purpose of the learning experiment, like, you just get a lot more data and insights and feedback from the experimentation and learning approach than you do from, let's say, the engineering-led approach first.
Obviously I picked extremes for the point of the conversation. Yeah. I'm wondering if you have examples, and maybe you don't need to name names, but examples of companies that you've worked with that have been able to do this, like have a really clear failure policy, like they might have like a parental leave policy.
Yeah, I think there's some organizations where there's, like, we'll call it a higher tolerance for experimentation, innovation, transformation, that maybe is more open and loose than Boeing, but tighter than SpaceX, right? There's some more parameters where these experiments are going to be, okay, here's one example. So there's I'll anonymize it. So it's a large, like medical company, right? Medical supply company. And they wanted to experiment with new things, but they have this like a important brand. It's out there. It's known as being safe, right? And so that didn't align with the experimentation approach, right? And I think in the SpaceX example, it's like, yeah, we're going to get out there, we're going to be public about this. But with a medical company, when people's lives are on the line and they're working with doctors and hospitals and like that their like brand reputation was really important. And so what they did was they set up a whole unit that was just for experimentation, not associated with, let's say, the mother brand. They created new brands around that were far enough away that customers and consumers wouldn't know that is them. Experiment with that, like what's called a sandbox. They put it out there, they experimented with it, they created these semi-anonymous or anonymous brands. If it worked, then they knew that they could bring it in and it was okay. And if it didn't, they could kill it and the mother brand was protected. So I like that approach where, it's experimentation, but it's conservative. So I think that's a good approach.
That's a great example, and so in alignment with the innovator's dilemma, because it would probably also not just have the challenges of potentially brand reputation, but it's like giving enough space, having it being outside of the mothership gives it a lot of other advantages in addition to the fear of failure around life-saving, life-threatening, life-risking things. One of the things that you were sort of touching on earlier with the Elon Musk, but really I think it all comes down to this, is the data. Because the data, hopefully, like clarity of data, it's not like we're just going to go, is it red or blue, and not have any baseline and not know what we're going for. And so I'm wondering how you help companies think through, as they're thinking about failure policies, the role of data and all of that.
Yeah, and there's so much data out there. I would kind of recategorize data as signal. I think nice. A better word to, is signal. And in that example that I just mentioned, they were looking for certain signals and they designed the product, these, we'll call them fake brands, right? The narratives, right? And they were looking for certain signals from the market around, hey, is this thing going to work or not? Like, is this viable or not? And then they would create the types of signals that they were looking for, and they engineered and designed feedback mechanisms and feedback loops to get that signal back that indicated to them, this is a go or a no go, ultimately. But there's a lot of different types of signals that you can experiment with. And of course, there's data embedded, within that. So I think the signal from the marketplace is, you can really design approaches that really get the signal that you're looking for, right? Like you can design that into the process, you can design that into the product and the narrative, and your social media or wherever you put this to get that signal back. And so I would say that it's one of the most, it's a critical component, signal from the C-suite around how they approach innovation. What is your signal? How do you know that you're getting support? Okay, well, these are the signals I'm looking for.
I love that, because one of the conversations that, as an innovator and corporate leader that I've had forever is like, if you are asking me to go into net new areas, there won't be data about that. Like I can look at the whole pie chart of possible TAM to, total addressable market, but like for our thing, I'd be making stuff up. So I really like the focus and the clarity of the signal, but using that, actually looking at the signal across all of the different parts of the process. If you had one piece of advice for people who are listening to this about how to consider and set up their failure policies, what would you say?
I'd say 100% make sure it's aligned with the cultural temperature, whatever that is, right? There's some, and it's going to be imperfect, because there are going to be pockets of any organization that are inherently going to be more, experimental or innovative, change growth mindset than others. And incidentally, as a sidebar, there are some tools and approaches that are available for companies to use to actually get at the hierarchical level and across functions as well. You can say, you can run an assessment across an entire organization with 50,000 people or 100,000 people and understand exactly where this cultural temperature lies, and then design these experiments with those people. You call them catalysts, I'd call them entrepreneurs, like these folks, but really understanding that cultural temperature and like the tolerance for failure, and I think right now here in the United States, we have a massive political change that just happened literally hours ago. And we're going to see, this is a live experiment to see how quickly, a population of citizens can metabolize, absorb what I would call radical change. And so that's no different from an organization where you're going to have pockets that are resistant or scared or, really not wanting to change. You're going to have other folks who are like, this is fantastic, this is awesome. So really understanding what that landscape looks like before stepping into, experimentation and failure is going to be really, really critical. And then designing strategies and approaches that cater to all those different types of constituents.
You just gave me a huge dose of empathy, because I usually have a pretty positive relationship with change, and I'm struggling to metabolize this one. And so if other people feel about the changes that we're leading in organizations like this, so oof, yeah, I get that now. All right, fun last question. Favorite catalyst, past or present, that inspires you, and why?
It's a great question. I don't know if I have one.
You can have more than one, that's okay.
And I think it's this is probably not novel or unique or interesting. I think Einstein is probably up there. His approach, the way he thought, his failure. Like, look at that guy. Like he was horrible in school. He was rejected. I think Abe Lincoln as well is probably up there as well. That guy, his failures were legendary, and then he went on. And so I think there's a correlation between the amount of times you fail. And I just posted it this morning about, staying in the game, having a positive attitude through failure, through setback, right? And it's not easy. It's not simple. I'm not saying it's like that. So that would be my historical examples, would be like Abraham Lincoln, Einstein, and just who they were, their failure, but then their ability to rise above. And I think today it's probably Elon Musk. I mean, that guy, you know, the past 10 years in Silicon Valley, I think I saw an article yesterday where it's like, this is a lost decade. You know, we created some great new food delivery apps, but he's out there making rockets and cars. And so I think that from an innovator's perspective, you know, pulling talent together and resources into something that is substantial and like human altering. I know he's not perfect. Certainly, I don't really know who anybody, you know, any of these folks are. But I think that what he has done, you know, those three people rise to the top for sure.
Amazing. And I love their connection to the failure conversation. They're all great examples of how, again, I keep using the word metabolize, but I don't have another. It's like how you do that and come out better, stronger. And not just that, but it's like how it's necessary. It's a necessary part of the journey. It's not just like, oh shit, and I overcame it. It was like, I had to do that in order to learn. So thank you so much for sharing.
Can I add a fourth?
Please go.
Jerry Garcia.
Ooh, why?
I mean, that guy experimented. He created new genres. You know, full disclosure, I'm a huge Deadhead, but I love his approach. It's experimental. You know, most of their work is, you know, call it open source, is out there. It's not studio. It's in the world. It's, you know, concerts. It's, you know, like it's improvisation. It's experimenting on the fly. It's with these 5, 6, 8 other people who are all with them kind of experimenting together. And of course, there are psychedelics and other chemicals involved, and that probably played a role. But I love his, you know, approach to experimentation and doing things new and collaborating and, you know, and failing and doing something. You know, you go back and listen to these shows and, you know, they'll have a bad night, you know, but it's like, you know what, that's part of it. That's part of the deal. But over, you know, months and years and decades, you know, this thing just evolved and it continues to evolve and it's way beyond him now. So just that whole arc to me is, it's fascinating. And so I'd put Jerry Garcia on there as an honorable mention.
It's a great one because like we're not going to be perfect every day, every time we step out on stage, but you just keep going and there's beauty in that magic.
Exactly. And I think there's a relationship, and I haven't looked at this, but the relationship between the performance of, you know, I'm in a studio, I'm here to make it perfect, and I want to go out and when I'm doing a live performance, I want to mirror that studio work, you know, versus Garcia, where it's like, you know, his stage and being out there, that's where he experimented with things. And I think there's an elevated, and I don't know, there's probably a way to describe this or, you know, a name for this, but like your performance changes when you're in that moment.
It's a co-created moment because the vibe of the audience there's like a feedback loop and all of that stuff. So I love that. Yeah. Tommy, thank you so much. It was a super fun conversation. We'll have to get together soon in person.
Indeed. And appreciate your work with Catalyst. I think this has been really helpful to better understand, you know, the personality types, you know, within an organization. And I know you guys do great work with identifying those people and supporting them. So I just love your approach to the Catalyst.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thanks. To our listening audience, thanks so much for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, if you have Catalyst in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.